that was one of the biggest things that kind of surprised me. I'd read a lot of like layman books about dinosaurs and things like that, but when Dr. Haynes and I started looking into the actual research papers, one of the things that shocked me the most is how much worldview and assumptions are just written into the scientific papers. They're so blind to their assumptions, even when they're doing so-called science, that only like half the paper is observational science. The rest of the paper is all storytelling about how this animal could have evolved.
Hey, and welcome to Zero Compromise, helping you stand for truth in a world that falls for lies. I'm Patricia Engler, joined here at the Creation Museum by Jessica DeFord, aka JJ.
Hello.
We have Rocket Rob Webb with us.
Hey guys.
And we have part 2 of a conversation on feathered dinosaurs, quote. Why does it matter? Are they real? So who are we talking to today, JJ?
We are talking with Joel Leineweber. He is the Vice President of Design and Web Content here at the ministry.
And as always, make sure you guys like, subscribe, and share this episode so we can get this message out to as many people as possible. So Joel is also our token paleo artist, I guess I could say. So in other words, he draws dinosaurs, and he's really good at it.
I like to draw extinct things. Yes.
Yeah, extinct things. So tell us a little bit more about who you are and some of the awesome stuff you do at our ministry.
Yeah, so I get to be involved in a lot of stuff, a lot of design-related things. I kind of have right and left brain tendencies. I like the art side, the visual side, but I also like the logic, the science, even programming, all that stuff, kind of where those two things come together, that's where I get excited.
That's cool. It's always neat to see how God brings people into their niches in the ministry. So how did you get interested in what you're doing in terms of dinosaurs and reconstructions?
Yeah, so I can't remember a time where I didn't love dinosaurs. Most little boys grow out of that. I never did, but I also love birds. And so this is like the perfect project for me to research both of those things. But growing up, my dad was a pastor, and so I was always checking these books out of the library that are filled with evolutionary ideas. And when I was a kid, showing my age here, there were not a lot of good creationist resources like there are today. And so my dad knew very, very quickly that he needed to give me a solid foundation. So I listened to a lot of John Whitcomb and Morris on cassette tape and stuff like that. And
our audience probably has no idea what a cassette tape even looks like. They're like these little rectangle things. Never mind.
Yeah, you've probably heard of them. But yeah, it was so foundational for me to be able to just have that biblical worldview as a 9-year-old kid checking books out of the library and being able to discern, oh, that's worldview and that's just their assumptions versus this is observational science. And so I developed that very early, and it was just invaluable to me as I learned.
And you were part of the recent Beyond Bones conference. Mm-hmm. We just had an interview with Dr. Gabrielle Haynes, so you can go back and listen to that. But can you describe what you were doing at the conference and what your presentation was on?
Yeah, so that was a really fun experience, being able to present for a full hour on this topic. And I was talking about the differences between birds and dinosaurs, because there are a lot of really major differences. Scientists nowadays evolutionists are trying to classify birds as part of the dinosaur group. And that's just an evolutionary idea. When you look at reptiles and birds, you see a lot of differences, and you see a lot of the same differences when you look at dinosaurs and birds.
As I mentioned in the last interview with Dr. Haynes, make sure you guys jump onto our YouTube channel, Answers in Genesis, as well as our Creation Museum YouTube channel. You guys can check out the full live stream of the Beyond Bones conference. Check out Joel's talk. Check out Dr. Haynes' talk as well, Dr. Pertham, as well as Ken Ham and his talk on dinosaurs and the Bible. So during your talk, you had a really interesting testimony, historical account, story, whatever you want to call it, of dissecting birds on kitchen tables. So I kind of introduced it with this interesting experience I had. I was at home, my wife was away, I had just put the kids to bed, and I heard a thud on the window of our back door, and my dogs were really interested, so I went outside, and there was this poor dove that had just kamikazed into our back window, killed itself. And so I did what any normal person would do, right? I wrapped it up in a plastic bag and put together a makeshift dissection kit and dissected it on our kitchen table.
Totally normal.
Yeah. Totally normal.
How long ago was
this? Do this? 2 years ago, around 2 years ago. Wow. And so that was, I called up my wife, and I was like, you're not going to believe what I'm doing. And
pause, silence.
Yeah, she was like, what? And I said, I'm dissecting a bird on our kitchen table. And her response was not what I expected. I expected her to say, you're doing what? Instead, she said, on my table?
Well, I mean, if it was a cooked turkey, I could understand.
Right, yeah.
I mean, it really just goes to show Joel's passion for all things birds and dinosaurs and the
yes,
whole
I'm a nerd. Yes.
You were curious about the anatomy of the bird, and there's differences anatomically between dinosaurs and birds. So can you describe a little bit of what those differences are?
Yeah, sure. So feathers is the obvious one, right? And people claim that there's feathers found on dinosaurs. Those are one of either two things. Either they're little filament structures that are found on the fossil of an actual dinosaur, or they are feathers, actual branching structures found found on an animal that used to be called a dinosaur, but now we're learning, oh, that animal was probably just a bird. And so feathers is one. Another really key one is the wrist. And so a bird has a swivel wrist, the ability to, I got a little prop
For
here.
those listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, Joel is using our skeleton model in the laboratory right now.
So if you hold up your arm, you can see your wrist bends top to bottom. And then a bird, their wrist swivels sideways. And I can't bend my wrists more than like 45 degrees sideways.
They look like they're waving right now
Yeah.
if you're listening.
But a bird can bend its wrist all the way back to its forearm because it's got this special bone in its wrist called a semilunate carpal. It's a little half-moon-shaped bone. And we find those in the fossil record on these animals that have real feathers. And so we can tell that, oh, that's actually a wing. So birds have wings. I know it's a deep concept, right? And there's other things around the shoulder and things like that we can observe. But then another big one is the tail. And so birds have a completely different center of balance. When they walk, we call them knee walkers. They walk from the knee. The knee is kind of stable and up close to the body. Whereas dinosaurs, they're hip walkers. They walk from the hip, more like humans. So these birds have a much shorter tail, much thinner tail in most cases, and the muscle structure is very different. And so whereas these dinosaurs have these big, long, thick tails with big muscle attachments because they need to be heavy to balance out the weight. So those are some of the kind of the three main differences: is the feathers, the wrist that shows that it's a wing, and then that different center of balance that shows that they actually walked like birds.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just going to say, in one of your videos, you had a really good summary about the three things, I guess, you can use between dinosaurs and birds. What are those three things, real quick?
Yeah, so
A little catchy tune that you
little
had.
catchy tune. Let's see if I can remember it. Yeah, feathered wing, swivel wrist, short-tailed bird, no feathers, regular wrist, and big-tailed dino.
There you go.
Yeah.
Nice.
And check it out on the YouTube video.
Yeah, I was going to say, just check it out on YouTube. Yeah, it was pretty catchy.
So you've looked through hundreds of articles from the evolutionists about feathered dinosaurs, essentially. So have you been convinced by all of those articles?
No, and actually that was one of the biggest things that kind of surprised me. I'd read a lot of like layman books about dinosaurs and things like that, but when Dr. Haynes and I started looking into the actual research papers, I've got over 500 research papers on my computer at this point.
That's it?
Yeah. And that was one of the things that shocked me the most, is how much worldview and assumptions are just written into the scientific papers. I had observed it in these books, and I expected that when they were talking to a layman audience, but they're so blind to their assumptions, even when they're doing so-called science, that only like half the paper is observational science. The rest of the paper is all storytelling about how this animal could have evolved. And it was really sad to me. I actually had to step away. I remember a couple times having to step away from the research for a few hours just to clear my head and say, because it was very frustrating, and it grieved me to know that these people were so blind to the truth.
Mm-hmm. Some big assumptions within the research is often how these dinosaurs or birds are portrayed and how they're drawn in phylogenetic trees or cladistics. And a lot of that is an artist's interpretation that is based on a worldview. And you have shown in some of your talks, which we have in the live stream, if you want to go back and look, of the differences and how you can just tweak things slightly to make it turn into a dinosaur or turn into a bird. So can you speak about that?
Yeah, so artists just have incredible power to be able to represent things as a missing link or represent things accurately based on assumptions, right? So if I'm reconstructing this as an artist, an animal, I can draw an animal like Archaeopteryx, and I can draw it in such a way that it looks like a missing link. I can draw scales on its head. I can draw the fingers kind of separated. I can draw the feathers kind of ruffled and gnarly and primitive looking. I can give it a thicker tail to make it kind of look like a missing link between dinosaurs and birds. Or I can choose to, and those are all assumptions. None of those are found in the fossil record. Or I can choose to represent it what it looks like based on the research we've done, where the wing is fully closed next to the body. The legs are crouched like a normal bird. The tail is thin. It has a beak. It doesn't have scales on its head. All of those things just show that, this animal now looks just like a bird. And it's remarkable, the difference. So anytime you're looking at a piece of art, don't assume that it's correct. It's fully based on the evidence. There might be a lot of assumptions going into that piece of art.
Yeah, absolutely. And you and Dr. Haynes have a really great YouTube video, I believe, as well. It's called, what is it? What evolutionists get wrong about dinosaurs, and something along those lines. But anyway, It's really powerful to watch if you get the chance. So you show the same skeleton for these creatures that are called feathered dinosaurs, and then you show how it can be posed like a dinosaur, but then you just change the pose of the bones themselves, put a different outline around it, and then you can just watch them morph from a dinosaur into a bird in front of your eyes. It's pretty powerful to see how art has that effect.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
Yeah, it just goes back to the fact that we all have the same data, we all have the same evidence, we all have the same dinosaur bones, fossils, but it comes down to that worldview interpretation. Start with the evolutionary worldview versus the biblical worldview. When we start with the biblical worldview, were birds created before dinosaurs or after?
Yeah, birds were created before dinosaurs, and I think God has a sense of humor, right? And sometimes he does things just to make it clear that, oh yeah, like if some people ask the question, did God use evolution? Well, there's a bunch of reasons why we know God didn't use evolution. Number one, it's 6 24-hour days, right? Another one, God said he made them to reproduce after their kind. But another one that makes me laugh is the fact that he decided to make birds the day before he made dinosaurs, even though evolutionists are trying to say that dinosaurs evolved into birds. He just switched it up.
Yeah, so birds were created on day 5. So we see the flying creatures on day 5 and land animals, which would include dinosaurs, on day 6.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a bunch of basically things that people call feathered dinosaurs that are maybe very dinosaur-like in terms of a bunch of things, but they have feathers. So in a lot of these cases, you can look at those 3 things you talked about: the wrist, the tail, and what was the other one?
The wrist, the tail, and feathers.
And
Feathers,
shoulder too, right?
wow.
Did you say shoulder or not?
Yeah, so shoulder is part of that
Okay,
too.
shoulder,
They have
yeah.
wings, right?
Okay, yep. So in a lot of these cases, it's pretty clear, clean cut. How consistent is that pattern? Like, can we pretty much always look at a fossil and say, this is a bird, this is a dinosaur? Are there any gray areas, and are those really problematic, or do they just need more research?
Do birds of a feather flock together?
That's a great question. And there are several groups of animals that previously have been classified as dinosaurs that were, as we look at them and research them, and you kind of have to research them on a species by species, specimen by specimen basis to really make sure you're looking at all the data. But the troodontids, the dromaeosaurs, and the oviraptors, all 3 of those groups, the really solid articulated specimens that we have, they look like birds. A lot of them have feathers, and they have these bird avian characteristics. But there are a lot of fossils that we find that we just don't have a lot of evidence. Utah raptor is a great example of that. It's a big animal, but they've only found like a handful of bones that they're sure belong to Utah raptor. They found a bunch of other bones in this one site that they think might belong to him, but it's hard to tell. So there's a lot of animals like that, again, we just have to look at the papers and really dig in deep to figure out, do we even have enough evidence to say one way or the other?
Our Ebenezer Allosaurus that we have here at the Creation Museum, we have the actual bones that were found and the rest that were kind of filled in to fill in that gap of making the full structure of the skeleton. And so often that's what we find in the fossil record, is those little fragments or little pieces of a bone or a few bones here and there, or they might be scattered like you said. So again, how they're maybe put together can be up for interpretation at times as well.
Right.
So
Yeah,
it's not like that scene in Jurassic Park where they find the fully formed, the big
Right.
fossil of the
Yes.
dinosaur. and
Yeah,
they're
the
digging
movies don't
up.
do it justice. Usually you're hunting around for scraps and bits and pieces. And it's hard to tell what was this animal actually? Allosaurus is a good example of one. We do have several well-articulated specimens, so when we find a part of an Allosaurus, we can kind of match it up with that and say, oh yeah, that belongs to Allosaurus for sure. And the one we have at the Creation Museum has one of the largest articulated skulls of an Allosaurus in the world. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, super cool. So basically, there aren't any clear, quote, quote, missing links. And even within a creationist worldview, we wouldn't interpret them as that anyway.
So I want to know, what's your favorite dinosaur and what's your favorite bird?
Wow, good question. I think one of my favorite dinosaurs is probably Stegosaurus. I just love the large
good one.
plates on his back. He's just such a cool looking profile. It's amazing. Favorite bird is a little bit harder. I've got like a bunch of different birds that I like. I've got like 5 bird feeders in my backyard. But I love hawks. They're just really cool looking. And hawks are actually part of that bird of prey called raptors, which is kind of funny because, raptors are typically people think of Jurassic Park or something like that. But that term was originally used for birds, so maybe that's why they appeal to me.
JJ's favorite is the crane.
I like I studied cranes. I like cranes. I studied whooping cranes that are federally endangered and sandhill cranes. But I don't know. I think killdeers maybe. I like wetland birds in general. But yeah, I think the killdeers are really cool.
Yeah, they're cool.
Or kingfishers too.
Oh, the kingfishers are awesome. And their Australian cousin, the kookaburra. They're really cool too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a kookaburra steal the meat off a student's plate in Australia once.
Oh, funny.
Yeah, it's sad.
All right, so going back real quick, so let's talk about movies, Jurassic Park. Talk a little bit more about like just the cultural influence that we're seeing today on, I mean, not just college campuses, but just really on culture at large in terms of this whole feathered dinosaur discussion.
Yeah, feathered dinosaurs are showing up everywhere, right? There's a Pyroraptor in the new Jurassic World movies, and a Therizinosaurus that's covered with feathers. And it's so much of that is just based on assumptions. Like Pyroraptor, they just found a handful of bones. They didn't find any feathers, and yet he makes an appearance in this movie where he's like diving under the ice. Mm-hmm. So just don't use, like, I love the Jurassic movies. They're fun to watch. I love a good monster story, but don't use movies as your source for science or your source for truth. That's just a bad plan.
Keep them in fiction. Don't move them into reality. Yeah.
That's something that actually people would say to me during grad school because I was working with cranes. So a lot of times they would tell me that the crane sounded like a raptor and they were talking about the dinosaur. And I would be like, how do you know that? Did you hear a raptor? It's because of the interpretation that they're viewing from the lens of Hollywood in those Jurassic Park movies.
Yes, for sure.
So speaking of those interpretations, we're talking about things like missing links. Can you even get a dinosaur from a bird? And that kind of reminded me, I've heard one of your talks where you were talking about what creationists sometimes call irreducible complexity. So this idea that living things have all kinds of systems that work together, and you can't necessarily just evolve that in a stepwise way and not affect the creature's survival and reproduction. So in your study of dinosaurs and birds and all the differences between them, have you noticed any examples of those things that just totally don't make sense within an evolutionary story of how that could work together?
Yeah, totally. So many, and it's hard to even narrow it down. But when you think about a bird and you think about the complexity of flight, it's just such a complex process. And so I'm going to go back to several of those characteristics I mentioned earlier. The feather, but just by itself, is the most complex integumentary structure in all of creation. It's an amazing structure with branch, a quill and branches coming off of that, and a zipper built into it. So a bird it uses its beak. It has a special oil gland that it dips its beak into, and then it uses that to zipper the feathers back up. And birds spend hours a day just preening and caring for their feathers. And then in addition to that, they've got this amazing wing structure with a shoulder it's located at the right place on the body. It has the right range of motion for flapping. They've got a special pulley system, muscle structure in their shoulder to help them raise and lower the wing. They've got the special wrist bones that is completely different from a dinosaur wrist. And then they're warm-blooded. You need to be warm-blooded. And so the feathers help keep them warm because they're warm-blooded. Dinosaurs were cold-blooded, and they had those special reptilian scales and scutes on their skin that act like solar panels. So there's so many problems. And then the shift of the center of balance forward in the animal. If any of those things went wrong in the evolution of dinosaurs to birds, they would just lose the capability to survive. And so it doesn't make sense at all. This irreducible complexity. God clearly created birds with fully functional system that's designed for their special environments and their special abilities, and then dinosaurs are a very different type of creature.
The respiratory system is another one too. Yep. The air sac complexity that are within a bird's body plan is amazing that God designed them that way.
Yeah, for sure. So you might see these evolutionary, textbook stories that are like, well, maybe you had this creature it was kind of developing wings and developing feathers, and maybe it used them for other things like catching insects or like gliding a little bit here and there. But what you're saying is it's a lot more to it than that. There's a lot of structures that have to work together in order to get these flight systems. So you'd have to basically reattach the muscle in a different place in the shoulder to get that to work, totally change the method of walking and the center of balance. So it's not just a easy evolutionary story from one step to the next. And you're doing all that without any guidance or foresight or plan. It's not like this creature that's trying to fly several generations down the road. That's not how it works.
Yeah, you never see an increase in that genetic information that's needed. And so real quick too, one of the misconceptions I hear all the time is, well, you biblical creationists, you're just looking at the sizes. If it's small, then it's a bird. If it's big, then it's a dinosaur. Talk real quick about that.
Yeah, so I feel like there's all kinds of things that you can fall into, all these misconceptions about, what makes a bird and what makes a dinosaur. So for teeth is one example. We find extinct birds with teeth, so you can't use that. Claws on the wings. There's a ton of modern birds with claws on the wings, and size is another example of a misconception. Because we think of dinosaurs as T-Rex, as this giant theropod dinosaur. And birds, you see birds in your backyard like a blue jay. It's real small. But there were large birds that we find in the fossil record. There's Dinornis, which is this 12-foot tall bird, and Apteravus, which is this bird with a 22-foot wingspan. It's just huge.
That's huge. That's
and so
bird.
There's large birds, and then you've got small dinosaurs too, the Compsognathids. And so you can't use size to tell the difference. You got to look at the anatomy.
Okay, so in the last few minutes, do you want to point our audience maybe to some resources to help them dig deeper into this conversation?
Yeah, so We've already talked about the YouTube channel. We've got some videos on there that Dr. Haynes and I have recorded. We've also got a lot of those videos are present on the Answers in Genesis website if you're not on YouTube. We've also got Answers TV has some great resources on there. And this research that Dr. Haynes and I have been doing is so cutting edge. It's basically overturning like 100 years of evolutionary dogma that even the creationist literature is having a hard time keeping up. But one book that does have some research from ours in it is Bodhi Hodge's new book on dinosaurs and dragons. That's a really good one as well. So yeah, be looking for more resources to come as well.
Yeah, Dinosaurs, Dragons in the Bible. I helped put that book together. Really good one.
Yep.
And it's written at a really good layman level, so pretty much anyone can pick it up and understand it. And one of the things I like about how you and Gabby, how you guys do your presentations, like during the conference, you take these really high-level concepts and you kind of bring them down so everyone can kind of understand this conversation. You also have a really good article on the Answers Research Journal. Is that right?
Yeah, if you want to get really technical, I wrote a research paper on there, and that one's specifically about Microraptor, which is one of these dromaeosaurs that evolutionists are claiming it's a dinosaur, but when you look at it, it's got full wing structures and it has that shifted center of balance and all of those things. So if you really want to dive into the anatomy, that's a great paper.
That conversation was dynamite.
Thank you for that. To bring it back to a slightly more serious note on just this last couple minutes, this is kind of a different question, but if a young person's listening and maybe they are going to talk to someone if this topic of feathered dinosaurs comes up, how would you recommend that Christians can use dinosaurs essentially as a gateway for evangelism and for sharing the gospel? Is there kind of some simple ways to do that?
I think they're a great tool to help people think foundationally, right? Because like we were just talking about, you've got all these assumptions, right? And when you're talking to someone especially who's interested in the science, and that's kind of a roadblock to the gospel for them, to believing that the Bible is true, you want to take them back to those assumptions. And questions are a great way to do that. And so asking them questions about why do you believe that, and why do you think that animal is a dinosaur and not a bird, and how do you know that's true? Questions like that can really help someone really think about their source of truth, because our source of truth is the Bible, and their source of truth is just this man's opinion that is constantly changing and shifting.
Yeah, going back to the worldview and the authority and the foundational principles there. And I think it's important to remember when we are trying to evangelize to people that we're not in it to win an argument either. And so we have all these evidences that we can share people with, but ultimately our hope and our joy is in Christ, and we want to turn people to the gospel, to the truth. And so that is, keep that in your mind when you are evangelizing, that it is to point them to Christ and the truth rather than trying to win that argument.
Yep, win the person, not the argument. Also, like you were saying earlier at the beginning of our conversation, I mean, kids, they really like dinosaurs. They love dinosaurs.
I don't know if you guys saw, but there was a little boy that walked past and the window's a little dark, but he had a stuffed animal dinosaur that he bought from the gift store here. Yep.
All right, well, I think that was a good conversation. Again, dynamite. In case you didn't catch the first time.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining. We really appreciate your time, and thanks for all the research you've invested with Dr. Haynes into this super important topic. It's just great to see creationists doing cutting-edge research from a biblical worldview. The Bible gives us tools to make good predictions that match what we find in the observational scientific world. So thanks for sharing today. Hope you're encouraged by that and that you tune in next time. Meanwhile, please keep standing on the truth of God's word with zero compromise.
See you guys later.
God bless.